I will just mention one thing which I have to always mention when they talk about predictions. I agree, Ron, that in a state of precautionary principle with unknowns, let's be honest, to build the capacity and to take a lot of draconian actions is completely understandable. And I said that back at the end of March, April. My problem was when we went through the normal influenza curve, the Gompertz curve. It was quite clear what was happening back in April, May, and then things didn't get taken away to get society working again. That's where I had the challenge. But yeah, it makes sense. The only other thing I'd mention is on the inaccuracy of the predictions. I think in fairness, there were many professionals around the world saying that that was out by a factor of 10. They weren't really listened to. And Sweden went ahead with the exact example you gave. They just asked their people to do the right thing. They did. They had no lockdown. They had no masks. Their ICU is down to a handful in 10 million people. Their deaths are gone. And, you know, they had 12 to 17 times lower than the Imperial College prediction. I mean, that's a huge difference. You know, if you see the graph, you've got Imperial College predictions and Sweden is barely along the x-axis. Yeah, and that's been a huge kind of positive side. I know it's very impactful, but like the lack of young, the lack of pregnant women. I even saw in New York back in March, April, they randomly tested pregnant women in a maternity ward in New York, like I think hundreds, and they got 16% PCR positive, all asymptomatic. So, like even back then, and from the China data, we knew the demographic that was going to get affected. So that's a good thing. You could go on all day. There's enormous collateral damage, which I don't think it's not really getting measured because we seem to be corona or nothing. It's the strategy, but that's the times we live in. So why does it have to be draconian now? Like I won't go into detail, but in Ireland it's unbelievable. They've shut down counties again, and we have no ICU and mortality. What's driving it? Is it fear, mainly? Increasingly draconian in some ways, like in June, July, when Ireland had no ICU action or mortality in around 6 weeks. And I thought, okay, it's over until next winter. They then brought in mandatory masks, you know, in public transport and in stores under pain of 6-month prison sentence and €2,500 fine. So those are the things that make me wonder as to what is the actual thought process going on up there? One last thing, actually, there was a phrase about, you know people by their actions, not by their words. And I can't remember the exact quote. But I noticed a couple of weeks ago, in the height of the fear around second wave and new mask orders and everything coming in, they began to take apart and dismantle the Nightingale Hospital. So the actions didn't seem to line up. So all the fear of a second wave, and you actually spend millions to fully dismantle your excess capacity while fearing a second wave that might be worse than the first. That's a complete logic implosion, I would have thought. The other thing is the origins of the second wave belief system, I call it cheekily. It's a belief system. But it goes back to 1918, really. Now, Hope Simpson and many others have written and published papers on this, and generally the consensus is that the spring wave, that was severe but not too bad, the second wave in autumn, out of season and hit a completely different demographic of young, healthy men. There's a broad consensus that that was an unusual event and a different virus from the spring. Either an 1870s virus that came back and hence spared the old because they had prior immunity, and hit the young. Or it could have been a major mutation because influenzas do mutate. But in any case, none of the 1918 second wave phenomenon really scientifically connects to this coronavirus. But it seems to be the driving force behind the fear. It's the one proof point that's not a proof point. Or what do you think of that one? My perception is, if there is a winter resurgence with the most at risk, aged and comorbid at risk in the winter, let's say, right now when there's no real impacts, you could almost see it as a safe spread season where you're building more community immunity, more T-cell, more mucosal, whatever. And maybe the best thing you can do to protect people in a few months' time is to have safe spread now, which ironically would mean that all the lockdowns and the suppression may actually put people at risk when this comes back in winter. That would be a huge irony because you've got all the collateral damage, societal damage, economic damage. The next or the generations coming are thrown under the bus in a way with the devastation. But you also might, by these measures, be making even the corona issue worse in 6 months' time. That's kind of a scary thought to me.